Thank you for being up to this beautiful day, and I'm glad that you actually have able to you. I'll talk about the panel. We have been doing many of these events over the last several months. Sometimes we are doing one of three panels. One of the some of you that have seen on several of these events are a great issue today. So what we're hoping to do is give you a quick snapshot about the minutes to help really get to where we are on the actually see this advanced nuclear technology and lots of curiosity and opportunities to the advanced nuclear. Just it's been very engaging conversation across the board. We don't see that in October, we put together some stakeholders that we feel are so nuclear technology broadly, and we started engaging in November, and we had a bunch of stakeholder meetings and January. I was those were blind enough but two months we had quite a bit. We talked to over people so far about these issues. And you have all features for 50 years, and I have personally led that more than 20 words as well as the road, including people that would have 5 years of being at UConn also for one class I was at so I think this whole opportunity of education has been very pleasant overall. Not everything is that it's concerned on nuclear technology, and I think that there is valid reasons for us to have
so that we can embrace and address those concerns. So where we are now is what we heard loud and clear in our initial synthesis of the stakeholder meetings is an interest on further conversations and collaborations. So we put together these 3 panels that sort of surfaced on the high hit rate of topics that are of near and dear to the stakeholders. And so the first of these is today, and then the 2 more coming up later on. So we are also doing a lot more of the engagement on regional cooperation. As you saw in our preliminary announcements, we thought that regional coordination and cooperation would be important. And then the 6 governors of New England came out and did a joint statement on the support for existing nuclear energy and coordination and cooperation across advanced nuclear fusion. Again, sort of a telling sign that we are looking at this in a more systematic fashion. We are approaching this in a more involved and informed and in an engaged way, and not rushing to a decision one way or the other. So we are open to additional meetings. We welcome anybody that reaches out to us. We are happy to also coordinate and support meetings that you may be interested in meeting with folks that have a particular kind of information and knowledge. So we are certainly very happy to be a conduit or a connector for you to be able to get the information you need from the subject matter experts that you are seeking. So that is something that we are starting to support. Gwen, you're giving me.
You should turn your camera on for the webinar, folks.
Okay, I should turn it on?
Yes.
My camera? I used to be technology forward, but now I am aging into a technology backwards, but maybe. By the way, that was Gwen. If you have not seen an email from her, You should. He really has made this possible. She's been an incredible addition, and she's only been with us for about a month, so.
Good luck.
Did I turn it on or off? I
You
just
should-
turned it on.
Just turn it on.
Good. Good. So anyway, sorry for that disruption, but so if you have any meetings that you would like to, for us to support, we would be more than happy to meet with you, and also support, helping petitioners. So the process, as described, essentially, we're doing our own due diligence, looking at a lot of references, looking at other state activities, national and global activities around nuclear energy and fusion. We are very open to public engagement. And if you're following nuclear energy, you would be not be surprised as to how rapidly things are moving. So to sort of stay up to pace in terms of technology development, rule makings, NRC regulations, and state announcements and pursuit of energy solution around nuclear is at a rapid pace. So as I mentioned, the stakeholder meeting sort of gave us three clear indications around the four pillars that we've been engaging folks on. We identified the gaps. There's an appetite for more information. There's an appetite for coordination. Small businesses are reaching out saying, who can we talk to if we have an idea about energy storage systems? Who do we talk to if we had advanced manufacturing that we would want to be? And this panel, of course, is going to focus on that ecosystem specifically. The sentiments, like I said, I think that there's some real constraints, cautious interest, and we want to support those sentiments so that we can kind of get to a place where we all can agree that that's been a good participation. Essentially, because we want to build trust, right? And trust comes through communication and access. If you don't have access to people and don't have the ability to engage, even though we may not agree, it's difficult to build trust. And so we are hoping to do that and be the source of engagement as much as we can. And then certainly, be able to realistically talk about cost realism and vision. So we started with a very modest, simplistic interest around workforce, technology itself, where it is, regulation and community engagement. Because of your input, we are starting to kind of fill out those pillars. And this is where the roadmap is. We're really starting to beef up the information that is informed through your input and our own assessment. And that's where not the picture getting prettier, but actually the information that informs that picture is actually getting much more, through this process of involvement. So the recommendations I kind of very quickly mentioned, there were four major recommendations: establish a state-recognized advanced nuclear fusion leadership hub, essentially an ability to talk to each other, leverage and align Massachusetts' educational and nuclear workforce strength. Many businesses are interested, many communities are interested in this. Advanced climate and leadership, winter reliability is a key issue brought up by many, including the ISOs that have identified this as in their many reports. And certainly, if nuclear was to be talked about, it needs to come with the realization of affordability. And so that was something that we made in our initial findings, and then aligns state policies and regional efforts. So the governor's announcement I already mentioned, the meetings I mentioned, and then the development of this discussion panels are all reactions to those recommendations as we continue the process. So we are essentially filling out the define, right? We want to define the roadmap's key findings so that we can conclude that roadmap recommendations so that can be open for coordination, leadership, next steps, and then whatever that leads to in terms of the step. So what are the kinds of things that are going into the roadmap details? This is an example around the Massachusetts' readiness for advanced nuclear fusion. What would Massachusetts need in place to responsibly evaluate and benefit from the advanced nuclear fusion opportunities? We're developing a metric, sort of a scoring metric where we'd say, okay, in R&D assets, what kinds of assets do we have in research and development within the state of Massachusetts? And one could argue based on the input that we have and the reviews that we've done that we are pretty much on a scale of exceptional to limited. We would be exceptional in the R&D assets for nuclear technology. And the relative strength, if you look at national, in this case, probably even argue global, we probably at the leadership level, right? Between MIT, UMass Lowell, just in terms of the infrastructure that we have, I think the state of Massachusetts has been incredibly fortunate to have 2 of the 18 research reactor sites and 25 total reactors that exist in the nation. So this is very, very unique that we have here as an asset. And so these are the kinds of things that we are putting in on each of those things, right? So workforce development, on manufacturing and supply chain, regulatory readiness, demonstration and deployment, market signals and financing. So each of these elements that then feed back into the 4 fundamental pillars that we were doing the evaluation on. This is the kind of informed data that we want to generate that provides a way for people to policymakers to look at this and say, hey, this makes sense. We want to do this or we want to do that. So that's what we're doing. That's what we're kind of like trying to get this information. So there's more detail to this, right? So we obviously kind of look at the specific strengths. I kind of talked about institutions. There's a fantastic example in a panelist that's going to talk about how the R&D from labs at the universities translated into innovation to commercialization, right? A commonwealth fusion with a cloud use case that can really demonstrate this process. And we can do many more where we can see this kind of that research innovation to commercialization. What does that mean in the nuclear and fusion ecosystem? So we go through that and we look at the policy signals. For example, Mass CEC's R&D funding that can now support fusion and fission is a simple but an important step in which we can advance this kinds of opportunities for the Commonwealth while being a leader regionally and nationally. So we're pulling in this kind of data that will then go into the roadmap as we move forward. And then also kind of providing some more specific details around these things. So with that, the 3 panels, you're here for the nuclear ecosystem panel. This panel is going to talk about the workforce innovation and supply chain. I hope you also engage on the next 2 panels. There's one on technology markets and regulatory environment. So today's panel, we're going to try to avoid talking about technology and regulations. We're going to focus mostly on ecosystem. Again, we'll talk a lot more about technology. And then we certainly are looking forward to the last panel at UMass Lowell on safety, spent fuel, and public trust. How do we build public trust around advanced nuclear fusion and understand and sort of, deconvolute this information that exists. So very excited to have the panel that we put together here. We're mainly going to be focused on workforce and talent, research, innovation and commercialization, supply chain and economic development. And hopefully somebody was asking me, what do we want to get out of this panel? Well, we definitely want to listen in. So I'm glad this is my only talking because I'll be sitting there with Gwen listening. We want to hear what you guys are interested in, what kinds of economy, what kinds of opportunities and assets that could be of use to you or what could be of interest to you, and what roles should various organizations, whether it's university, labor unions, and industry would play as we look forward to the roadmap. So with that, I just want to sort of share and thank the panel that has agreed to come in here, and I am going to hand off the mic to Melissa Levinson, who leads the EEA office on energy strategy. So, okay.
Great. So welcome everybody. Again, I'm Melissa Levinson. I head the Office of Energy Transformation for the state of Massachusetts. And I'm excited to be moderating today's panel. Like Sukesh, it's great for me because I get to listen. I can and ask questions. So it's a great place to be. So what we're going to do is I'm going to just quickly introduce the panelists just with their names and titles, and then each of them are going to come up and give us a brief overview of their organization and kind of how they fit into the ecosystem. And then we're going to have a bit of a dialogue. So let me try to see who is teed up first. So yes, all right. So we're going to go in this order. So first up, we're going to have Christy Colin. She is the Vice President of Global Policy and Public Affairs for Commonwealth Fusion. Then after Kristen, we will hear from Giacomo Buongiorno, who is the Professor of Nuclear Engineering at MIT. Well, then after that, we'll hear from Jason Seberg, who is Executive Vice President at Suffolk Construction. And then finally, we'll hear from Stephen Alden-Smith, who is Senior Managing Director of Infrastructure Advisory at EY. So right now, we're going to have each of them come up, and they're going to provide sort of 5 minutes. And taking a step back, building off of what Sukesh talked about, just again, we do have world-class universities, advanced manufacturing capabilities. We have a strong ecosystem here today. And we've got growing momentum in the Commonwealth, both for fusion and advanced nuclear technologies. And so each of these organizations that you're going to, individuals and the organizations they represent, they all represent a part of that ecosystem. And we want to hear from each of them about how they're engaging, both within their own firms, but also more broadly and with each other, both in Massachusetts, but also either nationally and globally, so that we can start to get that input and understanding of what's not just happening here, but what's happening around us. As Gash said, regionally is really important, but what's happening outside our region and what we can take in from lessons learned is really going to help inform what we're doing. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kristen.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me here today. Kristen Cullen. My team works on global policy across the world, here in the U.S. at the state level, but also in other global markets. We head up our state government relations. I have led a siting process for both the Devon site and our first power plant site. And we have someone on our team who manages our community outreach. Commonwealth Fusion Systems is about 8 years old. We were founded in 2018. We spun out of the MIT Plasma Science and Fusion Center with the goal of bringing commercial fusion to market. Oh, I have control over this. Thank you. We've grown in a very short period of time to become the world's largest private fusion company. We've raised about $3 billion in private funding. We're well over 1,000 employees. The majority of are here in Massachusetts. And we have a really interesting employee group, kind of diverse experience. And we are working out of our headquarters in Devens. So we have a facility about an hour away from Boston, where we have a manufacturing facility, our global headquarters, and where we're building our fusion power plant demonstration device, which we call Spark. That will be the world's first commercially relevant machine to demonstrate net power from fusion. Here's a picture of Spark. We're about 75% complete right now. We're starting to commission different systems right now. We just finished commissioning of our cryogenic system. This is very similar to what our power plants will look like, but this is actually just a demonstration. We won't actually produce power to the grid. That will happen for the first time in our power plant. Here's some pictures of our fusion machine, which is a machine called the tokamak. We're building this in Devens, and you can start to see this is actually a bit old, but all of the pieces are starting to come together. We also manufacture key components, specifically our magnet technology, which we demonstrated for the first time in collaboration with MIT back in 2021. And now we're manufacturing those magnets here in Massachusetts. Our timelines, right now, we're working to construct Spark. Spark will be completed, and we will be turning it on next year in 2027. And we are permitting our site for our first power plant with the goal of having that on and producing power to the grid in the early 2030s. We actually just filed our interconnection agreement with PJM, so making some exciting progress there.
Great to see the progress. I know Jacopo Giorno, MIT, special thanks for inviting me on already here. So in the, try not to be distracted by the view, which is really magnificent. And so in the next 5 minutes, I'm gonna try to answer this somewhat provocative question. Is there actually a nuclear system in Massachusetts? So we have a question. What do we do? We ask ChatGPT. So it is, and ask this: what nuclear energy companies exist in Mass? And turn 4 technology development companies. One you just heard all about, Commonwealth Fusion Systems, the other one Boston Atomics, the third Baltic International, and the fourth is Westinghouse. Okay. Well, TFS and all fusion companies don't think themselves as nuclear. I guess that doesn't qualify as a nuclear ecosystem. Boston Atomics is a startup that was created by 2 students of mine. Since then has gone belly up, no longer exists. Baltic International is actually headquartered in Florida. They are managing the decommissioning of the Pilgrim nuclear power plant, and last time I checked, they were very popular with the locals because of the management of the treated water release. And then lastly, Westinghouse, everybody knows, they do have an office in Mass, but they're actually based in Pittsburgh. So that seems all doom and gloom, but Massachusetts nuclear footprint is actually quite significant. First of all, Sukesh already alluded to, the centerpiece, I would say, and not self-serving at all, is the schools, right? So at MIT and UMass Lowell, we have 2 major nuclear engineering programs, dozens of faculty and hundreds of students graduate and declare a major in nuclear engineering every year, right here in Mass. And by the way, we haven't compared notes on this, but in the past few years, we've seen both at MIT and I'm sure UMass Lowell, a marked increase in the number of applications and in the number of declare majors in nuclear engineering. So really the kids are paying attention to this. And they get a degree, but often they also get, they get the bug, as I call it, right? They want to become entrepreneurs. And so by my count, just MIT, we have 7 nuclear startups. If I counted CFS, it would be 8, as Kristen explained, they came out of MIT. Of those 7, 3 are remaining in Massachusetts, 2 are based out of state, and 2 no longer existing, including Boston Atomics that I mentioned. Nonetheless, we do have, we have already contributed. And then again, Sukesh already mentioned it, really last but not least, 2 quite capable research reactors. And guess what? They're smack in the middle of Cambridge. I'm able to see it from there, and Lowell. And the machines are used for 2 purposes. First, of course, we leverage these facilities to teach our students how nuclear reactors work, and they get trained, and they do wonderful things with it. But these machines also directly support the development of nuclear technology for the US, for the nuclear industry. In other words, we use these machines to, as we say, irradiate, to expose fuels, materials, sensors, samples in these machines on behalf of the Department of Energy or the nuclear industry. And so the work that we do there directly really supports the national. But it doesn't end there, because we also have a very rich ecosystem in terms of suppliers. There are Massachusetts-based suppliers of what? Of equipment and services to the U.S. nuclear industry. This is for operation and maintenance, and going forward also. I'm not going to read them all here, but you can see it's pretty diverse. The American Nuclear Society publishes every year what they call a buyer's guide, and this is the latest from just a month ago. These are the companies. These are not strictly speaking all nuclear, but they do provide, as I said, suppliers and equipment to the nuclear industry now. So it can get much bigger than that. Why? Because if you're serious about scaling out nuclear, fission or fusion, pick your favorite, domestically and globally, then we are in need for innovation, primarily to bring down costs. I'll tell you, you're going to have your third panel talk about safety, talk about waste, very important topics. The reason why we're not building in the US 100, 200 nuclear power plants has nothing to do with waste, it's nothing to do with safety, it has everything to do with cost and affordability. Okay, so And we are in need of innovations to bring down costs and make nuclear more competitive. So innovations in what? Well, part of it is nuclear engineering related stuff, okay? Let the nuclear technology development companies and us in schools do our work. But the important piece is not nuclear that supports nuclear. Things like robotics, advanced manufacturing, AI controls, etc. And here Massachusetts can help because it already has a fairly rich ecosystem in this area, right? So everybody knows Raytheon, of course, AI and controls, big there, Boston Dynamics for robotics. You can use these technologies in construction and operation and maintenance of nuclear power plants. And that may be my favorite because it's another MIT spin-off, Boston Metal. They can actually make steel and other alloys that you can use again in construction of nuclear power plants, and they make it carbon-free because it's sort of a electrochemical process that requires only electricity as an input, not the burning of natural gas. So this is just to say, yes, there is already an ecosystem. It could become much, much bigger, but we're not starting from scratch. That's all I have. Thank you.
Running a tight ship is good. I'll be quick, trust me. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here, to be a part of this group, experts in their field. I don't often follow an MIT professor, but I'm going to do my best here. I'm Jason Siebert of Suffolk Construction. We started getting into this, I'd say, over the past 5 years. It's not something that we've normally done. But like you said in the beginning, this technology is moving so rapidly, and the clients that we work with, who I work with a lot, are mostly healthcare, life science labs, and a lot of them are talking about this technology college campuses as well, especially in Massachusetts, because of the sustainability goals that are the state and other AHJs are putting forward. And everybody's asking us the same thing: how can we do this? We can't do this through wind and solar. There must be something else. So over the past 5 years, as we started getting involved with this with several clients, and there's two in particular now that I think we're on the verge of this, what we see is an opportunity to leverage our years of experience in just about every sector you can imagine. We're doing data centers all over the country, advanced manufacturing, hospitals and labs, to leverage that experience to get into this sector in a meaningful way and contribute to this conversation that I think is going to be honestly the next big thing when it comes to energy in this country. And the more I hear from people like that, what you just said, it's encouraging to hear the technology's been around for a long time. We're in the fusion side, we learned something this morning that I wasn't aware of. And we're on the cusp of something big. And we look again at our portfolio, the type of work we do. And I can't look at it from the science, I can look at it from the building and construction standpoint. It actually lines up with a lot of the work we've done in the past. And from just a pure constructability standpoint, you can get your arms around it pretty quick in terms of cost and schedule and how I'm going to use the word straightforward and oversimplify, but how straightforward this can be if we can get through some of the other hurdles that we're going to mention here today. This can happen fairly quickly, and it can help alleviate some of the challenges that some of my clients have. There's a few, in fact, in the city that are building major projects, major buildings that by 2035 have to be fully electric. And I don't think it's any secret to say this. The grid's going to struggle to support that. I think everybody's struggling to support all of these great ideas that we all have, and how we're going to do it, how we're going to achieve it. Something needs to give. Again, there's not enough wind and solar out there to do it. So the more I started getting involved with this over the past 5 years, the more I realized that this is a significant opportunity. So again, honored to be here with the folks here in my place. Again, maybe the simpler part of the conversation, how it gets built. So thank you.
Thank you.
Right, and last, we'll see. I don't have slides, so I'm an advisor, so no slides. So by way of introduction, so I'm Stephen, one of the partners in the
I think it's
global strategy and transaction management. I lead our work in sustainable infrastructure in the US, and I'm part of a network of colleagues who advise these projects all around the world. So I think one of the exam questions at the beginning was, what else is going on around the world? What's the macro context? So I thought I would give my 5 minutes to that. And I think one of the important things that to just be aware of, right, is nuclear, sort of Gen 4, Gen 3 plus nuclear is seeing a resurgence across the world in terms of interest. In part as a result of decarbonization objectives, energy security issues, and also that stuff much more acutely in Europe and in Asia than it is perhaps here right now. So what we're seeing is major projects, both SMR and AP1000 type projects, really advancing in a range of jurisdictions. So we've been advising on the two big gigawatt scale projects in the UK, Sizewell and Hinkley. We're advising Rolls-Royce on the SMR program in the UK, but we're also advising on nuclear new builds in Czech Republic, in Romania, in Bulgaria, in France. So this is a wide-ranging pivot, not necessarily away from renewables, but towards nuclear. And apart from energy security, obviously what we're seeing here, and to a lesser extent, it's just explosive electricity demand, driven by AI, industrial electrification, decarbonization agendas. So nuclear is sort of very much back on the agenda all around the world. It's not specific to the US. But within the US, I would say probably about 2/3 of the states in the union have advanced some form of new nuclear strategy. Some of it's more embryonic and aspirational. Some of it is very far advanced. But nevertheless, I think there is a wide-ranging acceptance amongst governors that nuclear does have an important part to play in energy security and in decarbonization going forward. And it's been particularly interesting for investors, and we'll talk about more about this later, because being able to pair nuclear with decarbonization with AI creates an investment story, which is much more exciting to the investor community than just nuclear alone, which is, as historically been a somewhat more abundant investment. So there's a lot of positive drivers. I think the real key here is the economic value add, and a lot of states are very much focused on that as a way of not necessarily legitimizing nuclear, but as a way of explaining the multitude of benefits that can come with it. And whilst a lot of people focus on the jobs created in construction, and those are significant, the real prize is the supply chain. Because for every job that you might have in a nuclear power plant, you probably have 2 to 3 jobs created in a supply chain. So the economic value add is really considerable. So then the question becomes one of, what does it take to stimulate that supply chain? Is it about building plants and creating an ecosystem around those plants? And certainly in the case of gigawatt scale projects, that's almost certainly the case. The vast majority of the supply chain is on the site. But for small modular reactors, that's not the case. So there's a totally different ecosystem that can spring up and be created in and around modular reactor programs. So I think that's enormously exciting. So there's tremendous economic opportunity here. There is a bit of, I wouldn't say a race, but there's definitely some muscular tension for supply chain going on between the states. And we can look at the comparative examples of Tennessee and Texas, which are obviously somewhat more advanced in their thinking and development than Massachusetts, but there is a lot to play. So I'll probably pause that, and we can get into some of the more exciting financial and commercial details later. But yeah, long story short, lots to play for, but a lot to do.
That was, I think, really helpful framing. Really appreciate that. Did you guys want me to sit for that, or did you want me to?
Yeah, actually, I had so maybe the same thing.
Are you gonna like it might be long while
We'll send it out to your enhancement people will send up.
Exactly. All right. Great. Well, thank you guys. That was a great framing. So we're gonna start the discussion part. I'm gonna start with Kristen. And kind of build off of what you were talking about in terms of, so at CFS, right, you basically you have your headquarters here, you've got your manufacturing here, you've got your R&D here, you've got nearly around 1,000 jobs. So just thinking through, as you scale towards commercial deployment in Virginia for your first commercial reactor, what components, capabilities, supplier categories are would be most urgently needed? In addition to what you already have, or how you're planning of scaling some of that here? And what can Massachusetts companies in particular do to help position themselves to be supporting what you're seeing as sort of a growing, a growing need?
Yeah, so I'll just start by talking a little bit about kind of Commonwealth Fusion System, CFS, our kind of plan for commercialization. We are building our demonstration machine here, but really, I think what Massachusetts is really good at, and what we're doing a lot of at our Devon's facility, is R&D and advanced manufacturing. So right now we're building kind of key components for our demonstration machine, but that will evolve to building those key components, which are our specialized high temperature superconducting magnet technology for power plants, first in Virginia, but power plants around the world. We're designing all of our power plants in the same way. They'll be about 400 megawatts net, and we'll be manufacturing the components here in Massachusetts. And I think that's important to know. And then we'll be exporting them first to Virginia, but hopefully many other places soon after that. And I think that's the way we think about manufacturing. When we think about supply chain to support that, we really do benefit from a global fusion supply chain, because while kind of we're new to commercialization, the fusion has been around for many, many years. There's been many fusion machines and we benefit from the supply chain that they've been able to utilize. But those suppliers, which now scale up and start thinking about how they can be suppliers for a larger fusion industry. And so I think, that's been the shift we've seen in the supply chain globally. Now here in Massachusetts, the reason we selected Massachusetts, I think the siting search, we looked at many states, but we thought it was really important at the end of the day. We found a great site, and we needed to be in close proximity to our partners at the MIT Plasma Science and Fusion Center. And we had been working very closely with them through, particularly in early days of the company. So that was an important driver and continues to be a driver. But I think we really benefit from the talent ecosystem here and some very kind of unique supply chains that we've been able to take advantage of in Massachusetts. I think there's local machine shops, welders, there's talent that we use specifically in central Massachusetts. And there's more specialized areas, specialized semiconductors that we look at for thinking about the future, that are kind of primarily for aerospace and defense, that are based here. Massachusetts kind of has a unique ability there. There's things like radio frequency systems that are important to fusion, important to CFS. Those suppliers are based here in Massachusetts. So there's certain kind of areas that we're just starting to explore. I think in terms of small companies that are our suppliers, we've done a lot of work in terms of build those up and to have them make investments to work with us as we start scaling. But sometimes those are top investments for these small companies. So I think when we think about what can Massachusetts do, is how can Massachusetts kind of specifically start investing in some small companies, these suppliers that probably need to make an initial investment, start thinking about fusion specifically and what they can be doing.
That's super helpful, and kind of building off that. And I think, Yakima, I want to go to you next, because one, you did a great job of kind of framing the ecosystem, or at least aspects of it today. And given, the CFS grew out of MIT and kind of the R&D side, so from sort of the R&D to more commercialized innovation to now deployment, I guess from your perspective, where you sit, you've given us a little bit, but can you just go a little deeper into how you think we're positioned today? But that, where do you see some of the opportunities and the risks for us as a state, from that innovation to helping to advance more commercialization of the technology? Like where could we play in a bigger way? And what risks are we facing, or headwinds, to get there to allow us to do that?
First, maybe let me take a step back and what Kristen said, fusion also for nuclear, the supply chain is inherently global. So you're not exclusive. I mean, it's go nationwide, and frankly, even the state of the nuclear industry in the United States, very capable industry that operating existing fleet of reactors, been in operation for 60 years, but abysmally inefficient and effective at building new ones. A lot of supply chain nationally and that means you need a lot of lean on capabilities that exist in other Korea, China will be after part for all. So that's the premise. In other words, even being super optimistic and super positive about nuclear Massachusetts, the state itself cannot do it alone. The United States cannot do it alone. If we said all of that, I showed in the slides, I mean, Massachusetts already has a reasonable blueprint. In nuclear, it can grow, it can leverage those technologies that at the moment are not able to help bring down cost and frankly transform also operation. A big part of the cost of the levelized cost of the city for nuclear is, as everybody knows, the initial construction of plants. Also significant is operation and maintenance, and primarily that means that it's people. So anything you can do, talk about jobs, great benefit of having a nuclear power plant, they're well-paid jobs. But for looking at this from the point of view of the utility that is generating electricity, of course, there is a strong incentive to bring down the number of people required for operating plants. So some of the technologies that I talk about, AI, robotics, controls, they all do that. And they're involved. We are developing the state by developing those technologies. Other more specifically on innovation, I mentioned already a reasonable number of startups of MIT. You can very know UMass Lowell spin out. But I think that trend will continue. I've been at MIT for 22 years, and our students were always very bright. But up until 10 years ago, once they got the degree, they were more than prepared to go to work for a big corporation like Westinghouse, like for the regulatory commission, or just bury themselves into a national lab. All great jobs, by the way. Done that myself 4 years before that. But now what we're seeing is a very different lot. Right now, if they get close to graduating, say, well, I want to create a startup that develop some nuclear technology. It doesn't have to be a reactor. Of course, it could be a subsystem. It could be a technology that supports. So I think that trend will be, and we're well positioned because we are college and university central. In that case, not just for correctly wrong. I think the Boston area is the highest concentration of college and university worldwide. So that's my
can I add to his comments since you brought it up? So I think if you look at the history of the UMass Lowell graduates and our mission, we have produced some of our alums, ended up working through the operations and plant maintenance up into becoming the VPs of major utilities. So off the program from UMass Lowell Nuclear Engineering, we have a VP for nuclear engineering in Duke Energy, one at Entergy, and then also at high-level positions in Dominion. And I think it's very complementary with the UMass Lowell's mission of what we do and what you guys do. A lot of our graduates end up with EPM, which is one of the local companies that works nationally on operations and maintenance. We also put out a lot of operators that go to Seabrook Nuclear Power Station also. So I think, but recently our graduates are getting hired by Oklo, CFS, so I think that whole mobilization is very real, and I think it's very, very complementary to what we can capture within the ecosystem that education system. Let more rock to see possible.
No, and very appropriate interjection. Jason, I'm going to skip over you for 1 minute because I actually want to go off of something that Yakumo said. And go to Stephen because you mentioned it in your presentation that for every one job at a facility, there's 3 jobs in the supply chain. And so listening to some of the conversation or listening to some of the needs of CSF, listening to some of the conversation ecosystem framework that Yakimo just laid out, just from your perspective, where you said who you work with, thinking from that sort of investor community, there's the investor community in facilities themselves, but then there's also, right, investors in the startups, in the supply chain, right, in the folks that are actually going to be, you know, helping to enable industry growth. So just thinking through that a little bit, curious sort of what you're seeing in that realm, if that is an area, and what is the investors would need to do to kind of encourage that kind of, you know, financial ecosystem.
Yep, that's a great question. And I think I mean, you're absolutely right. There's financing for projects, and there's capital interest in developers and interest in supply chain. And to be honest, I think the private interest has been more focused on the developers and supply chain than on the projects themselves. Projects themselves are exceptionally difficult to financing. We can talk more about that later or at a different time. So absolutely, but obviously what investors need is return on investment. So there has to be a route to revenue and a route to returns. So if you're investing in a developer, for example, the question then becomes one of, you know, if you're doing it at an early stage or speculative level, what is the route to NRC, you know, approvals? So what is the project pipeline that these guys have access to? And therefore, you know, what is the revenue support that those projects want to make them better? And then you have to work backwards to say, okay, this is a great investment opportunity. And we're definitely seeing that at the developer level. So in the last year or so, we've seen some major IPOs in the nuclear ecosystem. So X Energy, Oklo, NewScale of IPO or equivalently IPO, with really fantastic valuations, so multiple $1 billion. And these are all companies where there is an expectation of approvals and a significant development plan. So that's what we need for investment in developers to flow. Is there has to be a belief in projects that will be developed that will generate revenue. To take the X Energy example, one of the key things that they're very successful with in Washington State is their agreements with Energy Northwest and Amazon, which basically is the state has allowed its decarbonization trajectory to be anchored in new nuclear as a way of meeting its 2050 net zero targets, and Energy Northwest, which is effectively a non-profit municipal utility, slight reductions, but that's the shape of it, has then entered into a framework agreement with X Energy to develop up to 10 SMRs. Now, the off-takers for some of that will be Amazon, who are providing revenue support. So revenue support, project pipeline, municipal utility, state support equals tremendous interest in X Energy. So that's the kind of flow. And the same applies to supply chain as well. It has to be a clear route to revenue in a sense. If you achieve that, then great. One of the things we were talking about with your friend from MIT earlier was the sort of Venn diagram in supply chain. What is relevant for fission type projects, what's relevant for fusion type projects, what's relevant for other high tech industries. And there seems to be a sort of a chart. Of course, you can chart through the supply chain where certain supply chain components and industries have multiple risks. And that provides resilience, obviously, because one goes up, one goes down, but it also provides tremendous multiplier for some of those sort of nexuses in the supply chain. That's also a high area of that.
It's great. Actually, that's a great segue to Jason. Given the work that you do, your company does, and we were talking a little bit earlier, your background, right? Life sciences, labs, hospital, healthcare. We talked a bit about data centers, so there's some transferability. But as a construction firm, when you hear this and you think about this, how do you think about your role in the ecosystem? How do you think about potentially how you would determine whether, when, how to scale up? And what do you think about in terms of the workforce around that?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, we're uniquely positioned for this because we are vertically integrated company. We have design build services, which is what kind of led us down this road in the first place, how we started talking to our clients about it. Having that ability to partner early on, which I've learned is probably the most important thing if you're looking to go down this road, even if you don't like understand the case study and pressure testing, you really need to start from day one with a partner that understands both sides, how it comes together, the science teams, as well as how it's built. It's interesting what you were saying, the private sector, I'm thinking about it because my sales institution, and I think what's about to propel this is what is happening specifically in the data center market. I think we're all reading the same thing. The demand that's been created by these facilities is overtaking any of the biggest predictions maybe 3 years ago. And that's where a lot of the interest right now on the private side seems to be generated from to build these things, because the nature of that space that needs to happen quick. What that's going to do is it's going to develop the technology to get the cost down, which I know is a great driver already, to make this more of a repeatable process. So if you're working with a firm like ours that understands the process, understands how to do it day by day, understands how to engage the workforce to do it, and understands the build itself, which, like I was saying earlier, is complicated, but it's very similar to some of the other things that we've done in our world, in both advanced manufacturing and, in fact, in the lab space. Think about validation, QC, all of this stuff, if you will, exists already. And I think the first hurdle is getting over the word nuclear for a lot of people in my business, because we have visions of something else. We power plant. We look at what one of these vision plants look like, SMR plants look like. It's, like I was saying, very straightforward. And that was surprising for us when we first started getting into it. But to understand what it means to the campus, to the building, wherever you're trying to, you need to engage somebody right from day one, understand what all that is. By the time that happens, I think all the regulatory, the cost, all these challenges that are out there, I think that's going to get behind us pretty soon. And again, I think it'll be propelled to what's coming up.
That's super helpful. And so each of you kind of talked about this from a bit of a different, unique perspective. You've done a little bit of the cross-cutting, but since we've had you all here together on the panel, where we've got from the investor financials and the product side, we've got a developer of technology and deployer of technology. We've got research, we've got construction. When you think about where we are in Massachusetts or even regionally, what are some things that you think could help connect the research institutions to the startups, to manufacturers, to workforce, investors? Right? What do we as policymakers need to think about if we want to create that connectivity, no matter where the Commonwealth wants to go? If we think this is an industry that is growing, whether it be here or whether it be nationally or globally, clearly there's an opportunity. So what do you see as needing to help create that sort of connective tissue from given all the potential competitive advantages we have as a state? I'm going to throw that open to anybody who wants to jump in on that. You got these questions in advance, so you should have some thoughts on it.
I think there's several things Massachusetts is really primed to do right now. And I typically speak specifically to fusion, that's probably relevant across the board. I think, Sukesh mentioned earlier the potential of building a hub of activity. I think some sort of cross-functional coalition that brings together academia, industry, labor, and suppliers to just generally kind of come together, build excitement, build an understanding of what the industry needs. It is a good start. You already see different regions in the United States start to do this. we've seen, I think the first was probably Washington State. They do a fusion week that's been incredibly successful, and they get a lot of national level attention. That something similar is starting to brew in Colorado. New Mexico has a commercial fusion hub for their kind of state ecosystem. And there's a couple other places that you're starting to see activity. And I think that would be a really good place to start for Massachusetts. And I think there's all the pieces that would be really important. I also think kind of very fusion specific, again, I'm speaking for fusion specific incentives or benefits in the state would be really helpful. And I think it's not just about the developer, as Melissa pointed out earlier. It's for some of the small companies and suppliers that we work with closely that could really benefit. And I think those are even smaller investments that could go a long way in building up the supply chain and supporting ecosystem. If you're doing some of those things, you could really attract a lot of growth in this area to the state.
Okay. If you can make sure that you use the mic, because I think we have a big audience online there. Thanks.
Yeah, I think there's a number of different ways to do this, right? And I think there's the sort of kind of command and control strategy versus the nudge strategy. So I think, to compare and contrast, New York is a little bit more on the command and control side. So the governor went out and committed the state to 5 gigawatts of new capacity, then directed New York Power Authority to figure out how to do that. And then New York Power Authority is now running a procurement process for counterparts. So, effectively the state is intervening directly. Now, alongside that, it's providing money for workforce training, etc. So, not dissimilar to the way that the offshore wind program. To compare and contrast, Texas has a slightly more sort of nudge political approach. So, Texas Advanced Nuclear Energy Authority has $350 million, and it's using some of that money, for grants and incentives to encourage manufacturers and developers to the state. So the state isn't necessarily setting a pipeline target, but it is encouraging people to the state. So those are alternative ways of going about it. I think to my point earlier, I do think pipeline, whether that's within Massachusetts or regionally, is extremely important, because that's what gives people the confidence that projects will be there, so that they will invest. Oak Ridge National Labs did a study a few years back looking at the amount of investment required to scale up supply chain in the US in fission. And they were estimating somewhere between $100 million to $1 billion per site in sort of major manufacturing investments. So people aren't going to be able to invest that money unless they really believe there's a pipeline of projects that are going to run. The other thing I would just say connected to that is workforce development is extremely important. Obviously, in Massachusetts, there's no shortage of exceptionally clever people with exceptionally good ideas. But to build these projects out and to build supply chain, you do need a lot of craft labor. And that is very hard to secure in this day and age. Now, Massachusetts has a real advantage because it's an extremely pleasant place to live and work. So you're not, trying to build a nuclear power plant in Porter County in the middle of the swamp, in the middle of nowhere, which has happened, and it's very hard to get people to go and work there. But at the same time, you are asking people to invest their careers, at a very young age in an industry which hasn't had the happiest track record. So again, pipelines are extremely important there. And the parallel I would draw in New England is the General Dynamics electric boat program, where, because the DoD has, committed to nuclear submarine program and refurbishment and modernization and building new submarines, that has allowed General Dynamics to recruit thousands and thousands of highly skilled people, which has, been facilitated by direct outreach into community colleges, technical colleges, universities. And people are prepared to, invest their careers in this program because they know there's a 10, 15, 20-year tail to this, which the federal government is standing behind, and people are prepared to invest themselves in that program. So, whether that's within Massachusetts, regionally or national, we need something like that, because you're asking people to commit their their livelihoods and their lives to an industry which they need to believe is going to be profitable.
I'm gonna go next. So when it comes to nuclear energy research in academia, we are facing a little bit of a paradox of them. On the one hand, the energy policy in the US has been exceptionally pro-nuclear for at least a decade now, and in a very strongly bipartisan fashion, which I personally feel is nothing short of a miracle. God bless, they're both parties like nuclear. However, that's a very pro-nuclear policy has translated primarily into support for industry and construction. And I would say appropriate, because what the industry needs now is what they'll build. But the paradox is that while we are, putting resources, debate if the amount is appropriate or not in construction, at the same time, it feels we're neglecting the future. The pipeline, which to your point is craft level people, but also nuclear engineers and innovators that come in the next few years that will develop the technology that we'll start using in 15 years. And this, of course, compounds with the general anti-academia sentiment for administration. The bottom line is that, particularly for support of graduate students, we're now being squeezed. Federal government is not spending as much money as they did just a few years back. So, I know it sounds crass and against self-serving, but to the extent that Massachusetts can make the investment in supporting our graduate programs in terms of research, that would be quite helpful. We've seen this done in many other states. This can be in the form of fellowships, which is direct support for students. It can be in the form of endowed share for professorships, which of course support the faculty, but that also allocates resources and articulate down. And honestly, the greatest thing when you're looking at this kind of investment in academia, it's leadership that I'm required for supporting us as a big construction projects. Companies and supply chain.
Yeah, I'll build off of two things that were said here. One about the workforce, I'll say for a second. I think one of the biggest things, honestly, in the city of Boston, for those that have developed a building or had anything to do with that process, the permitting and entitlement process in the city, although there for reasons, is extremely difficult to navigate. I'll tell you that. And I can only imagine if you were to layer something like this to that, whether it's Boston or the state of Massachusetts itself. So a lot of thought is going to have to go into the permit process if you were to put an SMR facility or plan on your campus within the building, whatever that is. And how does that not belabor a process that's far-reaching as it is? I think the interesting part of our business right now, construction, craft workers, as everybody can see looking out the window here, what's missing that was out there 6 or 7 years ago? Cranes, right? The city had this massive boom, and a lot of us, I've been in the business now for almost 30 years. We refer to the teens now as the little things, and we're all going to look back and say, "Wow, we were part of that." I don't think we're going to see that type of development soon, but I think what's happening with young people right now, except for MIT, of course, I think a lot of young people are looking at the cost of education and they're looking at the ROI, especially if you're looking to do something in the liberal arts field. And they're looking in our world and the craft labor especially, they're saying, hey, there's an option there. And it's actually a really good option. And if you live in and around Boston, you have this amazing trade unions that are there to train you and support you. And you don't get that in other industries. And so a lot of kids are coming out of high school saying, maybe construction is something I want to do. Well, the challenge is, again, if you look out there, the pipeline that we've been talking about, it's hard to see. And I think if there's more education around this field, if there's more promoting it from a regulatory standpoint at the state level, like what New York did, and I know Massachusetts has done something similar, they're creating this vision of wanting to have all this additional power because they want to give more fossil fuels, they want to electrify buildings, which is exciting. But again, to do that, it's going to cause us to pivot and do something different than what we've been doing. And this, again, is a real opportunity to do that. So the more we're getting the word out, the more we're telling people about this, the younger generation is going to get excited about it, who already are a little hesitant to pay $100,000 a year for education, especially now with AI, fear that that's going to take their job and get out. There's an opportunity to bring in more craft labor, bring in more students through research grants or whatever they're subsidized, to get more engineers, to get more people thinking about this, because this could be the next good old days that we refer to in the construction world of Boston in the 2010s, when things were really booming. You could see this being the next wave.
So I think what we're gonna do now is, open up the questions in the room, and then I will look online to see if we have any questions online.
I can walk around if people have questions. There was a question online about, what kind of funding, for some of the funding that was mentioned, how much of that is federal and private? Where is that interest? And I think, Stephen, you spoke more broadly. I think, Kristen, if you feel comfortable, I mean, that was a question that was asked. We can get started on that.
What are they asking? What kind of funding for what, for development?
So when you talk about all this new funding coming into nuclear space, and fusion space, where is all that money coming from? I think like the $3 billion that was mentioned for, other development projects.
Yeah, I can talk to the on fusion. So right now, there is a fusions industry. There's about 45 plus companies globally. The majority of those companies are based here in the United States, and they've raised combined more than $15 billion. And that's the vast majority of that has been private capital. In the US, there has been smaller programs at the federal level. There's a milestone program that was implemented by DOE that was modeled after the NASA HOTS program, which is the program that enabled commercial space, and that has been kind of small amounts of funding. CFS is a recipient of that fund. There's some other kind of funding programs, infused grant, that those funds go to national labs, but it's a public-private partnership. We work closely with the national lab to determine kind of the research project. Funding goes to the national lab, and a lot of the benefit goes to the private company. So that being said, I think right now it's very small amounts. Vast majority of the funding that's in CFS and other private fusion companies is private.
Yeah, maybe I can talk just a little bit more on the fission side. I think in terms of the developers themselves, the money I was talking about earlier is substantially private, and there's multiple billions of dollars have been raised by these handful of SMR developers, and then some the Westinghouse and very big private equity backers. So significant private capital there. I think it becomes more challenging on the actual projects themselves. Most investors are very concerned about first of a kind risks in terms of delay, construction overrun, costs, etc. So the federal government has played a very big role in most of the demonstration projects or the pilot projects that are being developed, and the DOE has numerous rounds of funding and products. Like all the names are very similar, and I can't quite remember which one's which, but ultimately they either provide grant funding, at-risk capital, or loan guarantees in order to insulate private sector lenders from certain risks. And that has been absolutely instrumental to the development of the sort of first wave of SMR projects. Equally, they have the federal government has provided funding for various workforce development and supply chain programs as well. So federal component is very significant. State money has been significant in certain places, certainly in Tennessee, in Texas, as I mentioned earlier, in Washington, elsewhere. And then the revenue support is exceptionally important, because you can have all the financing you want, but unless you have a route to revenue and you're paying some of the financing, it doesn't help you very much. So whether that's large investor-owned utilities, sponsoring projects, power purchase agreements with hyperscalers, or municipal utilities, there's been a lot of state intervention at that point.
So to complement what you just said, I think it's important for folks to understand the magnitude of investment required to build nuclear power plant, we'll see fusion. For a large scale, gigawatt scale reactor, $10 to $15 billion for a reactor, per gigawatt. Optimistically saying already. For an SMR, somebody has built in this, but we don't know. The expectation is that that was $3 billion for a reactor. Those are reactors that generate about 300. Okay, so these are massive projects. They're called mega projects for big management. That's why the government's got to help some form of by itself. Now it's working better. Still not one needs the other. You guys are okay, so big money. That's why government's got to help at least for the first time. Raises some money. So
Questions, Lori?
Raise your hand, I'll want you.
I was just wondering whether, for each of your perspectives, whether it's fusion or vision or construction, finance, or whatever it might be, what kind of timeline are you thinking about in terms of when this is going to be real? Because it would seem to me that if I'm a supplier, that would be really important, and a student, that would be really important. If I'm in your job in the industry, that would be critical for investors. So could you tell us what you're thinking about in terms of when this might be real?
Yeah, I definitely can talk about it. I don't want to monopolize, but
Well, I mean, yeah, that's my perspective. I mean, I think that, I mean, these are long development assets, but, you know, the first kind of wave of demonstration projects are, you know, sort of targeting operations, you know, 2030 to 2035. So, you know, still a ways away, but but obviously money is being spent now, and you're looking at, you know, for an SMR, I don't know, maybe a, you know, 2-3 year construction program for a gigawatt scale project, you know, 8 to 12 year construction program. So, you know, you can find profitable employment opportunities, you know, I think, as long as those projects are actually moving into meaningful development, you know, pretty soon. And then, you know, you know, as long as you're involved in the construction of the supply chain, there's a lot of.
so let me add, maybe be the one for once, be a little bit more upbeat. It is real. It is real. So that there is construction of the power plants going on now. In the US, early stages for SMRs and large scale, not yet, that yet project large scale. Micro reactors, which are yet another category, miniaturized now 10 megawatts. Next month, we'll see 3 or 4 being turned on. So people have been procuring fuel, procuring alloys. About the mine. So it's happening now. And, you know, to your point, it takes several years to get to electrons, get to revenue. But the project employs a lot of people during those 5, 6 years, 7 years. So it's happening now.
I'd say from my perspective, and I'm more in the lower end of the megawatts, you know, hundreds on the lower, not gigawatts certainly. But when I think about what we can do to build the facility, Steve, you're spot on. I think that 2 to 3 timeline is real. If the technology was ready right this second, 2 to 3 years from now, we could turn one of these on from a constructability standpoint. I think the challenges, again, what we talked about earlier, is regulatory and just getting everybody on board with this idea. But we've done facilities that are essentially like what we're looking at right now. We plug in a different piece of equipment than an SMR into a fusion, but the facility itself is known. It's not like it's to be improved. So I would say 2030 to 2035, I'm a little more aggressive. If you're close to 2030, you're going to see again.
Yeah, so for fusion specifically, I think kind of similar timelines. I think what I'll say is fusion's on a very similar timeline to SMRs. We benefit from a faster regulatory process. The NRC actually, I know this is off the regulatory panel, but the NRC made a decision unanimously to regulate fusion under a byproduct material process, which allows states, if they are a so-called agreement state, to actually issue a license for a fusion machine. So in Massachusetts, we'll be getting our license from Department of Public Health. Similarly, our first power plant will be issued a license from the Commonwealth of Virginia. We've built many kind of similar fusion machines around the world. Actually, the type of fusion machine we're building, 150 plus have been built around the world. We've innovated on part of that technology, which gives us a lot of confidence. We've released a lot of peer-reviewed papers, so we're confident when we turn our machine on, our demonstration machine on here in Massachusetts next year in late 2027, it will do what we think it's going to do. That's why in parallel, we've already started, we have zoning done and permitting done, permitting in progress. We're going to start moving dirt in Q1 of 2027 on our Virginia site, hope of going through the process to start vertical construction in 2028 with power on the grid in early 2030s.
Thanks for doing this. I just figured I'd stand, otherwise you wouldn't see me. Melissa, actually a question for you. I'm Jordan Woolman. I cover climate and energy issues at Commonwealth Beacon. With all the excitement in the private sector on this, you've already heard about timelines 5 to 10 years out, $15 billion for some of the large-scale reactors. For the state, a state that's confronting an energy affordability crisis like we are, that's not what, that's not going to be the near-term fix, right? That can be going on in parallel track, this research and development. But we have 2 nuclear facilities in the region right now, up and running, Seabrook and Millstone. Are there things that the state is thinking about leveraging there to get more nuclear power into Massachusetts now that can grow the supply that we know the governor wants to see, and keep the private sector work going, for the future, but right now leveraging the 2 facilities that we have now? Are there things that you're thinking about there at all? Thanks.
Well, I'm going to phone a bit of a friend on this after I say one thing, because we have our Deputy Secretary, Louise Noir, who works regionally on this. But the short answer is today these facilities are providing about 20 to 25% of the energy that we have in ISO New England. So they are operating, they're producing, the electricity is flowing, and that's part of the regional power mix that we have. I'm going to let Louise talk a little bit about some of the regional work we're doing and some of the work we're doing from a procurement standpoint.
Sure. So I will say that at nuclear facilities, existing nuclear facilities, and Jacopo, you might be able to speak to this too. Some of them have gone through uprates, so you can achieve greater efficiency at the existing units and actually be able to squeeze a lot more megawatts out of the existing facilities. You have to, Unit 3 at Millstone just recently completed that process. You have to see whether Unit 2 at Millstone or the unit at Seabrook might be able to do that. But that's a space where you can see some more power delivered from the existing units. For now, we're looking at, as 6 states, looking at preserving the existing fleet, of course. So you saw that in the statement that was issued in March. And all of the states are coordinating with Connecticut, which is in the process of doing a zero carbon RFP. So coordinating across the region on that. And then, of course, the other part of that statement was exploring advanced nuclear, which we're doing at a state level and then also at a regional level.
Thanks. I'm Frank Callahan with Massachusetts Building Trades Unions. And Jason touched on this earlier in terms of workforce pipeline to construct these. As he pointed out, those were the good old days. I'd love to see more cranes in the air here. But we have a workforce that's ready, willing, and able to do this work. We have a membership of about 75,000 already trained to do this work. As I talked to Sukesh and Gwen earlier this week, we have the capacity, again, concrete is concrete, welding, electrical work and other components. But we have the capacity to scale up if there are specific needs, like we did for offshore wind. There are mock-ups of wind turbines at the IBW Taunton and other facilities and training people to work offshore. So we have the capacity, so there will not be a shortage of a skilled workforce, at least on the construction side, should this move forward. And I like your optimism. I was hoping to hear next year, but I'm not that optimistic. Thank you.
And do we have any questions online?
Yep,
Online question.
yeah.
What, can I actually just ask the panel to have a follow-up question? I think the cost number gets thrown around a lot, and I know we're gonna spend a lot of time on this in one of the next panels, but just to clarify, I think, can the panelists sort of comment the significant cost when it comes to the first of the kind? If anybody's ever tried to get a plumber to come take a look at a small leak in your faucet, it's $150 just to show up. It's different when you do economics of scale and you start to build things. And I think it's important. I mean, I want the panel to kind of clarify that, because I think when you throw out that 15 billion number, it just seems too overwhelming and 15 years to build.
Obviously, I'm just gonna touch on the build aspect of construction piece. I think Yakuni does say about this, but Frank, you said it a lot more eloquently than I could. This is something that our skilled craft and our trades do. When you look at a vault that these SMR units have to go, that's a vault that's been built for decades. We have skilled labor that knows how to do all that. There isn't a first of its kind with that. When you look at the electrical associated, that's not first of its kind. Just about everything when you go down, this is how we put it together around the reactors. This is things that our workforce has been doing this for years. So when you look at the cost there, it's easy to get your mind around. It's not what people think, and it's certainly not big. I think where it gets a little challenging is, where does it go? What do you have to do to put the vault? Where does that vault have to go? What has to move out of its way? And that, back to my comment earlier, you need to be working early on with a team that understands all that. Because the first challenge you're going to have isn't necessarily, how do I create this SMR vault? Where does it go? And what do I have to do to move it that way? That drives some of the cost. But again, from a construction standpoint, Frank said it best. This is actually something that's done just about every day outside of some stuff.
Like, follow up.
Almost as the model.
Yes.
Is it okay?
There you go.
So when it comes to cost of energy, I think we need all to be exposed to a little bit of a reality check, right? Energy is going to be expensive. It's going to be more expensive than we're used to, particularly if you transition away from fossil fuels. But even if you stay with fossil fuels and somehow Massachusetts decides we're all going to do everything with natural gas, you're going to have to build pipelines, which are billions, tens of billions of dollars investment. Same if you're trying to bring down hydroelectricity from Quebec, we have to build transmission lines. So $10–15 billion, it is of course cost, but you get 1,000+ megawatts and an asset that is going to be there for 68 years. So when you then translate it to, say, levelized cost of electricity, it ends up being of the order of $80–90 per megawatt hour, which actually, going forward, for electricity that is reliable and carbon free, not that bad. So yes, financial risk, the amount of capital you have to put on the table for a large scale reactor is high, but the intrinsic value of that machine is exceptionally high. It's well worth it. On this business of first of a kind, mega projects are tough. That's why there is interest in going smaller, right? Think like your comment, think or look at how you construct these things. They will look simpler than you expected, and probably they will be simpler than this gigantic cathedral that we're used to in large scale reactors. So mega projects are tough. When you do it over and over again, the costs come down. even in the most dysfunctional nuclear projects around the world, we've seen that if you build not one unit, but two reactors, three reactors, four reactors at the same site, the first is expensive, second is a little cheaper, third is a little cheaper, the fourth is. Yeah, so it's about that.
Yeah, maybe I'll just add a couple of extra ones. I completely agree with everything you said before. I think it's, you know, the conceptual beauty of this SMR is that you standardize design. You get regulatory approval for that design. People don't mess with the design, they mess with the regulatory approvals, and this is which is, you know, where nuclear projects have ballooned in cost and delays, when, you know, a couple of things. One, changes in designs during construction, so rushing to construction, changing the design, which requires another regulatory review, if rightly so, which then necessitates other changes in design, etc. That destroys cost and control. Second thing is, particularly, you know, in the larger nuclear projects, fabrication plants. You know, they're heavy in fabrication. There aren't that many companies in the world who can do it. There have been, you know, examples of errors in fabrication, which has necessitated the redo of major pieces of equipment, which again has caused massive consequential delays and ballooning costs. So standardized design, standardized supply chain, standardized regulatory approval has the capacity to remove a lot of those, you know, cost exploding situations. And what that then means is you can, you know, not only reduce the cost of production because you've got the volume, it also just dramatically reduces the probability and risk of cost control failures in production. So I think there's a lot of reasons to be optimistic on the SMR side, and even on the large nuclear side. I think, but on that side, the demand for standardization and replicability is what's really important.
I just want to give a shout out to my fusion folks, because I think that they have learned at calling it a machine, which is standardized, and are creating walls that allows to do exactly the same thing. I'm just gonna speak for you, but I think when I visited the site, I think it's very indicative of how you're approaching construction.
Yeah, I was just gonna talk about kind of similar, I think that's our approach, is to build the same kind of 400 megawatt facility to standardized construction components. I think the regulatory point is a good one. I think that's really had been really important for fusion, because we fall under a completely separate kind of this Part 30 byproduct materials regulatory process. We can continue to innovate on the technology and drive down costs without having to go through kind of the process again, which is pretty significant in terms of costs associated with the plant.
So can you, since you're on that, there was a question, can you just talk a little bit more about the regulation of fusion, and maybe just a little bit about the difference in the technology between fusion and fission? Because I think that probably there's not a lot of clarity of why you would be regulated differently.
And we should also remind that we have a whole panel.
We have a whole panel, but we do have a couple questions, so we just even do it like 2 minutes, and then I will take a question that we have online around some supply chain.
Sure, and I would also hand this off to more technical questions to my colleague here. So fusion is the opposite process of fission. In fusion, you take light atomic nuclei like hydrogen. We use isotopes of hydrogen technically for our fuel source, and you build a machine on Earth to create the conditions to allow those kind of atomic nuclei to fuse together, and you get a heavier like helium is the byproduct of fusion. So technically, the fusion process, the only byproduct is helium. We do use that isotope of hydrogen. We use deuterium, and then we use tritium. Tritium is what we have received our license for here in Massachusetts, and that is kind of the byproduct material. I think when the NRC looked at fusion coming down the pipeline, they really looked at kind of the risk appropriate way to regulate fusion, and decided that this made a lot of sense. And so that's why fusion is regulated under this kind of PERC 30 process. And happy to turn it over to Giacomo for the differences.
Okay, maybe I want to speak about difference in technical terms, but I will say a few words about regulations. It is true that historically it has taken a very, very long time to license, review and license, the technology. But frankly, over the past 5 years or so, things have accelerated and changed quite dramatically. We have 4 different regulatory frameworks, Part 50, 52, 53, 57, and there's been sort of a progressive march towards simplification and streamlining of the review and licensing of your reactors. In fact, at the moment, I would say that licensing and regulations are the bottleneck. So back to what I said earlier, bottleneck is the risk associated with the project, is finding financing, having a capable supply chain, finding workforce. Those are the training stations. The technology is also not finding a good idea there, more mature than others. But so I would say regulations. I got the mic. 30 seconds. I want to go back to the question on how to squeeze more value. We talk about this out of the sides that way you're entering. First of all, they're generating an enormous value for the region. 2 ways. You mentioned power upgrades. That's from an economic point of view, it's a slant it costs a fraction, less than 10% per megawatt, per additional megawatt. The power upgrade on an existing nuclear power plant and building a new one. The electric utilities, the media that NextEra understands perfectly, and so they're in the process of getting power upgrades. But there are limits what you can do. So if you have a reactor that generates 1,000 megawatt, optimistically you can get maybe another 20%. That's by the way a big stretch. So 200. If you want additional gigawatts, you got to build more reactors. But that's also an area where these existing sites can help, because here goes to environmental impact, licensing, local acceptance, etc. It's going to be a lot easier path to deploy new reactors at existing nuclear power plant sites than just going to a big field here in the Boston area and say, voila, we're going to build a new reactor there. That ain't going to happen easily, but with a people and build still, I think it's a much higher chance of success.
Great, thank you guys. And so I am gonna ask a question. You guys have touched on a few questions that we already got online, so I'm gonna pull out some that maybe we haven't. So here's a direct question. Is there any part of the nuclear supply chain applicable to both fission and fusion you think we should push hard to be getting in New England? Examples would be workforce, equipment manufacturing, et cetera. What do you think would be the most beneficial to bring to the region? So are there things where, again, bringing the two together?
Yeah, I mean, I honestly do have the easy one again, as Frank alluded to. I mean, we have a lot of that here. There's a supply of labor here. Albeit there are some aspects that will require training, but I don't think that'll be a huge lift. And it's funny, a lot of what I've read over the past year, especially talks about labor being one of those supply chain constraints, and maybe there's other parts of the country, but certainly not here. We definitely don't have that issue here. I think outside of that, on your world, because there's probably.
Yeah, and I will take a guess because I don't want to speak too much for the fission industry, but I think there's things that would be interesting for both. There's large forgings that are needed for certainly for fusion. I think we get those from global suppliers right now, but there's interesting, there's a shipbuilding industry here in Massachusetts that, I think is positioned. We've looked at shipbuilding, around the world. And I think that is something that could be positioned to transition to something like certainly for fusion and likely for fission as well. There's, workforce needs that I think are relevant for both. Some of the hardest jobs we have to hire for are welders. And I think that's probably the same for both. So investing in certain workforce areas would be, certainly benefit us. Prototyping labs, machine shops. I think those types of investments would probably be relevant in both areas.
Thank you. So another, here's a question which, interesting to position it. So when we sort of think about where we are in development, we've heard about, right, we've got sort of looking in the 2030, 2035 time range. People are planning now. We've heard, 10 SMRs in Tennessee, 10 up in Washington State. We have a fusion machine going in Virginia. So here's a question of what's going to happen if 1 or 2 dozen states all try to launch huge construction projects at the same time? Will shortages of materials, skilled workers cause a competition for things that will delay projects, drive up costs? So, how do we address that?
No, again, when you look at the components themselves, I think you mentioned there's four companies right now, IPOs are going online or like ramping up. I think a lot of it's gonna come down to like, if there's only 4 manufacturers of the technology itself, and again, I'm talking SMR, I think that will become the bottleneck. Outside of that, again, to build the facility itself, I don't see any challenges there. Now, I'll say that maybe I'm oversimplifying it. Everything that we've seen tells us this is a very repeatable process with materials that are readily available that honestly our industry uses every day. But it's going to come down to those 4 manufacturers. How much of those components are coming in from overseas? We've all seen what's happened over the past 4 months because of one particular area of the world and what constraints that's put on every industry. So to me, that would be probably the highest risk. You want to, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, I personally do think that would create some capacity constraints, not necessarily in construction, but the turbine market is already exceptionally constrained. So, you're looking at 3+, well, CCGT plan, probably a 5-year lead time on a turbine for a steam turbine, maybe 3 years. So, most of the turbine manufacturers are pretty much at capacity already, so they would have to scale up production as well, and they're intending to. But again, security of pipeline is important, and I think I think there's an element of of appropriate sequencing, collaboration, and not necessarily cooperation between states, and certainly planning. And we saw this a little bit in the offshore wind market, right? When Massachusetts and New York and Rhode Island and Connecticut and Virginia all trying to do offshore wind projects at the same time. I mean, there's no heavy steel rolling, east of Pennsylvania, and not enough marine welders, and everyone's trying to find people in the Gulf Coast who can come up to New England and do this. So there is a bit of sequencing required, I think. But that shouldn't be beyond the realm of possible.
Could we do one last question and then maybe the lightning round that you had here about 2:20?
Sure, and I would love something.
But yeah, I mean, I'll let you, I know the audience.
Yeah.
Jim Koontz, some of the great metrics have been coming around about timelines. You mentioned about levelized cost of energy, about 8 to 9 cents or $89 per megawatt, whatever term you use. Also, what is the range that you feel is reasonable from the standpoint of dollars per kilowatt installed? So for example, a 100 megawatt project probably is going to be higher than 1,000 and so forth. And if you look these things up, the ranges always go very high because there's always the outlying project. And if you're talking to policymakers, sometimes they're going to choke on those large dollar values. So what is I'm just kind of want to poll the panel if you don't mind. What's a reasonable dollar value for the range for 1,000 and 100?
1,000 megawatt?
Yeah, a 1,000 megawatt production facility. How many dollars per kW installed versus 100?
Yeah, I'll start. We do a lot of cost estimation and modeling at MIT. I had the numbers. So for 1,000 megawatt, first of a kind, you're looking at $10,000 per kilowatt.
Mm-hmm.
You go down to 100 megawatt, $15,000.
Yeah,
you appreciate that the scales opposite to what people might think. Smaller will cost more per unit energy generated.
Right. Now that's first of a kind.
First
Yeah.
of a kind. Tenth of a kind, what we think is reasonable, you're probably gonna around $7,000 per kilowatt for a large reactor, maybe 6,000, basically, and a couple of $1,000 for a small reactor.
So you're like 6,000 to 7,000 for an OIK. What?
Fantastically competitive.
Right.
If you value firm and carbon.
Right, and then you said 8,000 to 9,000 for 100K, an OIK for 100 megawatts. Okay, thank you, I appreciate that.
Yeah, we actually do, but I can't kind of release exact numbers right now. We have a techno-economics team that works on this. We're going through engineering exercise to drive the cost of our first power plant down right now. But I'll say that kind of all of the work that we've done indicates that first block fusion will be able to compete with clean, firm power sources on the market. And we've already seen that. We've actually already sold half of the power through a PPA of our first power plant to Google. They've already purchased 200 megawatts.
The only thing I would add, everything Yakimo said, I would agree with it. One of the challenges I'm having with one client is the need is only maybe 130 to 150 megawatts. And the smaller you get with the SMRs, it drives up the cost, it's higher. What's interesting though is clients' appetite for creating a revenue source, or whether it's the campus, the facility, they're looking at it like potentially selling it back to the grid. And what does that do to their cost modeling? And that's something that I didn't realize again going into this, like, wow, that's actually a great idea. This is a business opportunity for the campus, the facility, whatever it is, that helps in that cost modeling.
At the risk of just adding something else, but not going to argue with MIT on data, but the only thing I would say on the SMRs is, there is an economic value in the heat that isn't always factored in, right? And then we look at the Dow Chemical project in Texas, a lot of, it's not just about electricity, it's about the heat output of the plant and the economic value of that. So if you had an SMR, for example, that was producing electricity, but either behind the meter or dispatched to the grid, but you're also using the heat in district energy loop or a thermal energy network or in industrial heat source, then the economics are very different.
Right, no, thank you guys, and I think, yeah, by the way, you actually answered a couple of the online questions we had about cost, which was, right, the expectation of where we are today and expectation of where you potentially see the cost going over time, but also kind of the putting it in context of the LCOE in terms of, valuing it for not just kind of the firm, but also for decarbonized. So thank you I don't have to ask that last question now. So I'm going to wrap up with one question to each of you, but this has been a great conversation. We'll have like one lightning round question for you all, but just to wrap up what I've heard today in terms of where we are in Massachusetts, and from where do we sit in terms of a potential kind of competitive edge, right? We have a pretty strong foundation in several areas and institutions and talent in that innovation entrepreneurial kind of ecosystem space. We are starting to build into that manufacturing or rebuild, I would just say, in that manufacturing space. And that is sort of an area to build on in that context of ecosystem of what role Massachusetts could potentially play as we see this area grow nationally, globally. And so I guess a question for each of you, the final one, kind of those were at least my takeaways from what you guys said. Are there what do you see in addition to those as some of the biggest opportunities? But also, what do you see as some of the biggest risks for Massachusetts over the next decade? Any of this from the ecosystem development standpoint?
I'll just quickly say, I think the opportunity is obvious. I mean, we have the ability with these world-class educational institutions that are around us, the people, the trades, we have everything going for us in the state of Massachusetts. So the opportunity to be a leader in a new field that potentially, I believe, can solve the energy crisis that we are in. And let's be honest, it is going to be a crisis with everything and the expectations that we have now. The opportunity is we could be a leader. Conversely, the risk is the obvious. We're going to miss out on this opportunity. And we know that there's other states and other parts of the country that move a little quicker sometimes than we do. We think things through and we're thoughtful, but it's gonna take the collective group of all of the talent that we have to figure out how to do this safely in a responsible manner so that we don't miss out on this opportunity.
But well put, I would have said, the risk is the missed opportunity, and we talked at length about the, the positive, the opportunities.
Yeah, I mean, I'll echo the same. I think, there's, Commonwealth Fusion Systems is the largest fusion company in the world, and we have the largest private research institution for fusion at the Plasma Science and Fusion Center at MIT. That is why CFS selected originally to come to Massachusetts. We have this talent ecosystem that well positions us to build kind of this stage of the company, and also to grow here. I think we're also well positioned to innovate on the supply chain and support those suppliers and the smaller companies that are also able to take advantage of this ecosystem. So I think it's both. It's the companies and the suppliers, and I think we should be really thinking about that as well.
Yeah, maybe just my perspective, I agree. I think that the opportunity here is really, really significant. I think the kind of question for the Commonwealth to some degree is how best to bridge the gap and solve this chicken and egg situation of we need projects in order to legitimize pipeline, supply chain coming here or investing here and people staying here once they've got their fantastic education without unduly betting taxpayer dollars on something that may not work out. I think there are plenty of ways to do that, but threading that needle is going to be an important part of the equation.
Well, let's thank the panel and the moderator for this show. I just want to kind of bring everybody's attention the next panels, and then for folks who are here, there is going to be some time for networking, and so there's going to be some food, finger food. So please stick around. We have the space till 3 o'clock. And like I said before, I think I'm already starting to see connections and people talking to each other. And that was something that was missing in all of the things that we did virtually. So I hope you take advantage of this. And then the next panel coming up in Shrewsbury, that's on June 15th. And if you're not able to go, maybe your network, somebody in your corporation is able to go, please allow that. We are looking for a larger capacity role. We were hoping that with this 50, it allows for some level of networking. If it grows larger, it feels like you've gone to a conference. And so that's part of the reason we're kind of creating that kind of sort of small setting that allows enough people to provide that. Nothing is perfect. If you have ideas about how we can do other things as we continue to develop panels and discussions, please feel free to provide us input through the roadmap email channel and website. We are open to input, whether it's good or bad, to continue to improve and be the resource that the state of Massachusetts allows us to be to provide the conversation that needs to happen. So with that, I thank you again, all of you, for the time, middle of the day. Thank the whole audience for sticking around and coming out. Thank you very much. Thank you.